Good afternoon and welcome to Community Roundtable. My name is Paul Bergeron and my guest today is Steve Marchant, candidate for governor in 2018 for the state of New Hampshire. Good?
Bye.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Bergeron, and I am the guest host today on Community Roundtable. I am filling in for David Lyle today on Community Roundtable. I am, for people who don't know me, again, my name is Paul Bergeron. I am on the Board of Public Works in Nashua as a commissioner, serving, completing my 4-year term. I also serve as Hillsborough County Commissioner for District 2, which is Nashua, Litchfield, Hudson, and Pelham. And I am a local realtor. So today I am pinch hitting for Dave Lyle on Community Roundtable. My guest today is Steve Marchand, candidate for the governorship. And Steve announced, I believe, in spring of this year.
Long time ago now.
Yeah. So anyways, it's my pleasure to serve today. We've got some questions for Steve. He's a local New Hampshire guy for the most part. And so we're going to ask him some questions why he's running for governor, what his hopes and plans are for the future. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Great. So for people that don't know you, where are you from originally? Where'd you go to school? What are you doing now?
Well, I live in Portsmouth now, and I've lived in Portsmouth for the last 17 years. I used to be mayor of Portsmouth and was a city councilor before that. But I'm a Manchester kid. I was born and raised, like a lot of folks in New Hampshire. My folks came down from Quebec in the 60s. West side of Manchester guy. French is the first language of the home. Eventually, we moved to Pinardville in Goffstown. I went to Goffstown High School. Eventually, went to Syracuse University to be a sportscaster. That's where you go to be a sportscaster.
Absolutely.
And I also love public policy, and it's got a great Max Welsder Public Policy School. And then after a year, I realized sports was going to be my hobby, and public affairs, public policy, was going to be my vocation. Eventually, I got a master's degree in public administration, an MPA. And then I started to audit city, county, and state governments professionally, which is what I've been doing off and on for 20 years. But then I moved to Boston after college, met my now wife of 16 years, and I convinced her to move back to New Hampshire as fast as I could. And Portsmouth is where we settled back in 2000. So except for school and a couple years in Boston, pretty much a lifer in New Hampshire.
Wow, so that's pretty good. We were talking earlier on camera, and being the French family, we were too.
Yeah.
As my family came down, and we lived in the French Hill section of Nashua, and went to school there. And so we've heard you speak French a little bit. So.
Un petit peu. Je peux parler un petit peu de français, mais quand j'étais jeune, mes parents parlaient à moi. They spoke to me en français, mais j'ai répondu la plupart du temps en anglais. Usually I would answer in English, but they would speak to me and write notes and such things in French.
We were talking earlier on before the show started about people speaking French, and the difference between my brother, who's only 4 years older than me, and myself is that my brother speaks fluent French, and by the time even just the 4-year difference, that's how I was. I understood exactly what you said in French, but I would answer back in English. So.
And for my parents, when I've asked them since then, now as an adult, why they did not push to have me answer in French. This is common, I think, among a lot of immigrants, is they so strongly want their children to fully integrate as quickly as possible into America that they were worried that I would not be able to speak English at the same level as my peers entering school. So for them, getting me to think in English all the time was their goal. Obviously, I don't mind speaking French. But it was a point of sensitivity for them growing up. So that's why they would speak in French out of necessity, and I would answer in English out of their desire.
Right. That's very good. That's really interesting. So why do you want to be governor?
Well, like I said, I've been a mayor. I've audited city, county, and state governments around the country. I'm a data guy. I'm an MPA, the whole thing. And I love my state, and I love optimizing outcomes. And when I look at New Hampshire, I see an opportunity and a risk over the next 20 to 30 years that will be based on decisions we make around now. And so I have a mission that I want to see achieved for my home state. I want New Hampshire to be the best state in America to do at least 2 things. The best state in America to start and raise a family, and to start and grow a business. And it is that way because it addresses what I think the 2 biggest challenges of the state are our demography and the increasing lack of dynamism or entrepreneurship in our economy. And those two things are actually quite closely related. So when I look at the best practices of other cities and counties and states around the country over many years now, I identify some of the things that we do well and other things that we could do much better and that would take advantage of many of New Hampshire's natural strengths. So you can be fiscally responsible and also have an ethos of very inclusive policy, progressive in terms of shared opportunity, but have a tremendous passion for entrepreneurship and job growth and job creation. And those elements are very consistent. So I want to take all of those best practices, the passion I have for those things, and apply them to my home state in a way that will make us really competitive over the next 20 to 30 years based on decisions we've got to make right now.
So you ran for governor 2 years ago, or a year,
last
a year
year,
ago,
yeah,
a year ago, and finished second in the Democratic primary, I believe.
Yeah, I got in with only very late. For the folks at home, if you ever want to run for governor, you usually would either have time, money, and or name identification. I decided to test the theory of having none of them. And it turns out it's difficult, but I finished a strong second and gained about 20 points in the last 2 weeks of the campaign with no advertising. And it was a very grassroots effort with a message that I believe was very strong and certainly authentic and passionate. When the gentleman who beat me lost in the general election, it was very soon after that friends and supporters of other candidates from 2016 said, I liked you. Just get in a lot earlier because now I know who you are.
Right.
And that's proven to be a wise move and has really cemented our place in a strong position as we get closer to 2018. But it was a great experience last year, and so obviously it's with eyes wide open that you jump in early this time.
Right. So do you have one or two things that if you were elected governor that's priorities to you specifically, anything that you say, if I could get these one or two things accomplished during my term?
There are, and it's far more than two things, but you obviously have to prioritize. When I mentioned the mission of being the best state in America to start and raise a family and to start and grow a business, there were, and we can get into the weeds over the course of the program, there really were four elements that kept coming up going back to my days as Director of Corporate Relations for UNH, which I did for several years. And I kept listening to these business leaders that would tell me, we need more young talent to either stay in the state if they live here already, or to move here if they don't. And the four things they kept saying were America's best pre-K through 12 public education, a commitment to infrastructure, including bridges, roads, clean groundwater, reliable cell phone, internet, lower electricity prices. The third thing was a genuine, holistic, lifelong commitment to how we turn back the scourge of addiction that we face in New Hampshire, because it's economic as well now. And the fourth is building this culture of entrepreneurship to make it a highly attractive place to start a business, since most new jobs created in this country come from young, new businesses, although we love our existing ones. So I'm looking at where smart investments produce the greatest return on that investment, and it's new business formation. So it was education, infrastructure, addiction, and entrepreneurship. And so most policy drives back to helping us succeed in all four of those areas.
Right. Interesting, last week, I'm sure you followed the Nashua city elections.
Sure.
And the three alderman at-large candidates that were elected were Dave Tenza, who was a former assistant county attorney who's now in private law practice.
Yes.
Shoshana Kelly, who runs her own marketing company. And Brandon Laws, who is an entrepreneur and owns a liquor business, basically the bartenders, and they go out and do private parties and things, and he's an entrepreneur. And I just thought it was interesting when you were speaking about that, how that's exactly the type of people, when I interviewed them on my radio show, I said, you're the exact type of people we want to attract and retain in New Hampshire.
And one of the missions I have outside of pure public policy as governor is I want to be part of, as I'm 43 years old, and I want to be part of this generation that's emerging in public life that can show that the kind of people you've just described, Brandon and Shoshana and Dave and many others around the state, Joyce Craig in Manchester, great elected officials we got last week in Portsmouth, all over, that being an elected official, being a politician, is not a bad thing. That we need talent to be in the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and the public sector, because we're going to need all three of those elements to integrate and collaborate if we're going to achieve the kind of big goals I'm talking about. And so we need talent to see that being in the public sector is a worthy, honorable, good thing. And part of how we do that is hopefully through performance ourselves, demonstrate that you can be highly competent, ethical, and passionate in public life, and it will draw more people, hopefully, into doing the same thing.
Right. When people ask me what I do for work, I say I'm a realtor and a politician, and then people laugh and they go, "Oh my!" And I go, "No, I look at it as a good thing." You know, I'm able to accomplish a lot of things both at the public works level with the infrastructure improvements here in the city, but also at the county level. Like one of my priorities was the SATCO program in the Valley Street Jail, which is, they call it substance abuse. They need to change the name. You would say misuse, but substance abuse treatment for community offenders, and that was up and running. That was a priority of me when I got elected. I said, if I could accomplish nothing else and we can get that up and going, and we do have that program up and going. So. And
that success in the public sphere is part of how you get. I mean, I know Dave well. I've gotten to know Shoshana this fall. Spent some time talking with Brandon recently. Nashua is very fortunate. Its proximity to the Massachusetts border and the 128 belt. I know it gets derided by our current governor sometimes, the state of Massachusetts, as the enemy. And we don't have to embrace all of the policies. That's why we have a federal system. Every state is different. But our proximity to the 128 belt is an asset, not a liability.
Oh, absolutely.
And we are in a place where the more that Nashua and Manchester and the Seacoast and other parts can, like a straw into an orange, can enjoy some of the benefits of our proximity, the more in the long run that we can bring some of those entrepreneurial types into New Hampshire. Maybe for a while they'll continue to work inside the 128 belt, I get it. But eventually, if they enjoy the quality of life we have with great schools, infrastructure, treatment and options in dealing with addiction recovery, as well as this culture of entrepreneurship, we can eventually draw them into bringing the rest of their life, including their professional life, into New Hampshire. And when I see folks like Dave, Shoshana, and Brandon winning at large seats, that's very exciting. It's a great face for future residents of New Hampshire.
It's very exciting. They have so much energy, and it's just it's very interesting that they burst on the scene, and a lot of people said, "Oh, maybe you should run for at-large, or maybe you should run or for a ward seat, or maybe you should run for a lesser seat." And I'm just so happy for them, and great energy. So.
Absolutely.
We do have a question that
Yes.
from YouTube, so we'll take that. It said, this is from Jenny, and she says, "Thank you for this opportunity. I wish you well in your campaign. New Hampshire needs a huge improvement with mental health care. New Hampshire got a D in 2010 by the DOJ, and how can New Hampshire improve on the mental health care?" Not on one of my questions, so thank you for that, Jenny, because that's an oversight on my part.
It's a great question, and I've done about 135 meet and greet style events in New Hampshire this year. So we've done so much qualitative, interpersonal, it's become quantitative. I can actually count it up. Mental health is one of the 3 or 4 issues that I have been surprised at how often it comes up. And I'm going to talk about it first in the context of addiction. One of the biggest challenges we have in having our recovery centers be all they can be, deal with resources, but operating money, and it's people. It's such a challenge because of the lack of reliable operating funds in our recovery areas, recovery centers. To have people come in and they tell me the majority of the time, somebody who is seeking recovery services also is looking for mental health services at the same time. And in the majority of situations, because we do not have reliable operating dollars to be able to fund the talent needed to provide this holistic, this full suite of services, mental health is one of the places where we lack the talent. We need more people, and we certainly need it in recovery services. So one of the places where I prioritize in my budgetary proposal, an additional $8 to $10 million a year for recovery centers that move us from treating it as a police action or as a 28-day recovery period, because that's what insurance might cover, to a healthcare conversation, more of a hub and spoke style with one of the spokes, like Vermont is doing successfully, being explicitly mental health. If we do not make that kind of priority of it in our funding and in our treatment services, then we're missing something that will prevent people from ending up back in the same situation that often led them into battling addiction. So mental health is right at the top. I look at it as part and parcel of how we deal with recovery services, because the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. I believe the opposite of addiction is connection. And part of that is connecting with your wellness, with your family, with your community, with the economy. And mental health is right at the dead center of that. So I treat it as a top priority, and that's included in the way that I look at our budget in 2019, should I be in that position.
Well, you were spot on that. I'm in long-term recovery from substance misuse, which I've talked to many people, and I'm pretty open about it, open to remove the stigma associated with it. And when you do, what happens is so many times when people go to a 30-day or a 28-day program and they get out, people say, well, you got that behind you. And it's like, that's the start of your life, and that's where you need the support. And there's so many good resources now throughout the community, but they're definitely going to need the support going forward, because it's certainly not a 28-day program and out, and all the things that you mentioned, the connections in the community and the community support is just critical to ending the addiction.
And if you think about it too, in terms of addiction, for so long we've treated it first as a police or a law enforcement action. And I think that's been one of the barriers to identifying some of the best practices that we have in terms of the formatting and the resources that we have in other forms of medical recovery from whatever it is. And it's this hub and spoke. And Vermont has seen arguably the nation's best reduction in relapse for certain kinds of substance use or misuse. We've seen strong recovery data, and Vermont has been able to do it. And this is also where the Medicaid expansion program is so important, because a lot of the dollars that would be needed in order for us to provide sustainable operating funds, predictable, where you don't have to worry every 91st day whether or not you would have the money to fund the positions, because it's really about human capital. Vermont has done this really well. And so to the extent that we can avoid recreating the wheel and thus accelerate best practices in recovery, we should do it. And Vermont provides us an exciting opportunity right to our west to learn quickly. And so that's, again, why mental health to me is at the dead center of how we're going to deal with substance misuse and addiction in a really holistic way. And I find this to be an opportunity for bipartisan action as well.
Absolutely. I'll extend an invitation to you if you ever would like to tour the Valley Street Jail, Department of Corrections in Manchester, of which is under the umbrella of my Board of Commissioners at Hillsborough County. And we do have that the SACO program in place, and I'd love to tour with you and show
absolutely.
it. The superintendent, it's for some people don't believe that that should be funded, but that is a holistic approach. It's not, while we have people for 60, 90, 6 months that we can run this program, but it doesn't end when they leave. That's the key piece to this program. It doesn't end when they leave. It continues, and it's in a partnership through Superintendent Dion at the Department of Corrections, as well as Keystone Hall under the umbrella of Harbor Homes. And so, anyways, it's I would love to have you come and tour with that, and I've extended the invitation on that. So we do have a couple of other questions. Yes. Domestic violence, I'm sorry. What can we do to help people, those in dangerous domestic violence situations, more effectively?
Well, I was on the board of Sexual Assault Support Services in Portsmouth for a number of years, and they're now part of Haven, which is a coalition, the blending of SAS and A Safe Place, because there were a lot of resources that we found we could get a lot more scale, especially with our emergency hotline service and some of the services we provide. So there are a couple elements off the top, and I don't claim to be the expert, which is one thing that's a little intimidating at times about running for governor, is there are some things I am an expert on. It's my life's work. But you get asked about such a wide range of issues that there's a humility that you quickly acquire if you're grounded that says, I can't know everything about everything. And so you're in this constant hopefully intellectual curiosity-driven process of learning from those that are experts in the various places. And I think this is one place I've had the good fortune of working with those that are amazing. They're leaders in how we help victims of domestic violence and how we prevent it. One of my friends from high school works for Haven, and she does amazing work in the prevention field. How do we communicate domestic violence, sexual abuse, what it is, how to talk about it, how to prevent it at the youngest ages, because unfortunately, so many of these patterns that lead to sexual abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence begin at very young ages. And there's such a power disconnect between the adults who are committing the violence and the children who are confused and obviously intimidated. Amazing work that I've seen done, beginning with kids at the youngest grades. I'm talking to kindergarten, first grade, that use puppets and are able to communicate in age-appropriate ways about how to identify this. So part of this is the younger that we can begin to communicate what's going on, how to identify it, how to prevent it. That is so critical and so much more valuable than trying to figure out solely how we can help those that have become victims. Prevention is the best.
Absolutely.
So that's a big element of this, and I have had the good fortune to spend time on that. Limited resources. It is amazing how few additional dollars would be scaled into such additional exposure for more children to be able to get much deeper in this prevention programming that is done in New Hampshire. They're working off of pennies. But the cost, not just in human life, but in the actual dollars, public dollars, when we deal with recovery, obviously dwarf the money that we could spend on the front end if we thought of it that way. So in almost all areas, whether it's public education, public health, domestic violence, sexual abuse, the more that we invest in ages 0 through 6, 0 through 8, 0 through 10, that is a return on the public dollar investment that is almost difficult to quantify. It's so large. And this is one of those areas. But certainly in terms of domestic violence, I think to the extent that we continue down the road that's begun, again, in a bipartisan way, to identify those that have been perpetrators of sexual violence, domestic violence, we absolutely should prevent those that commit such violence from being able to own guns. Sometimes there's debate about whether or not they should be put on such a list. To me, there is no debate. They absolutely should be included in that category of those not allowed to have firearms. And again, I go back to, it is small dollars on recovery that to the extent we can't prevent all violence from occurring, can we make sure that the operating funds are available so that we can do it right? And again, it is holistic. We're not going to solve this in a matter of weeks and months. This is a lifetime of recovery. Absolutely. And that's the attitude we need to have. It's a public health issue. And in terms of the perpetrators, that is there is a violence element to it, and we need to be vigilant about that as well. This has been a bigger set of issues in the 135 town hall meetings I've done than I would have guessed before I began this process a year ago.
Absolutely. People are starting to sign up for their health insurance, and people are posting all over social media how much their health care costs have gone up. So Medicaid expansion, do you support that? And what can we do as a state to help lower health care costs for our citizens while providing coverage for all of our citizens at the same time?
Well, first, to me, it's no question, and it's not just me as a Democrat running for governor. It's Charlie Baker in Massachusetts. It's Phil Scott, a Republican in Vermont. It's John Kasich, Republican in Ohio. Larry Hogan, Republican governor of Maryland, who agree that we need to continue the Medicaid expansion program. What it has done to help those in the most vulnerable position in our states is clear. You can measure it. I grew up in a home where we filed bankruptcy because we didn't have health insurance. My dad got stuck with a house, he's a carpenter, that he could not sell during the 1990 recession. That was a bad recession here. And we cut our insurance as part of the lack of income. We had to cut expenses. And a few months after we cut the insurance, my mom had a heart attack at 39 years old. And it was an $80,000 medical bill from the local hospital in Manchester. And they tell you, like any hospital does, you got a choice. You can pay the bill in some form, or you can file bankruptcy. And it's the #1 reason in this country why people file personal bankruptcy. When I hear people in Washington and Governor Sununu talk about the freedom to choose whether or not you have health insurance, they have not spent 5 minutes in the shoes I spent time in. I experienced the freedom of not having health insurance. It was the least free my family has ever felt. There is nobody, virtually, out there who is looking for the opportunity to not have to have insurance. That is not what the anxiety that's very real out there in New Hampshire is about. It is the anxiety of being one healthcare emergency, one economic calamity of $1,000 away from hitting the floor. We hit the floor. Medicaid expansion program greatly reduces the risk for tens of thousands of New Hampshireites that they will hit the floor. And so to me, it's a no-brainer. And I find it hard to believe that any governor who has spent any time talking to people in that precarious situation would not feel the same way. And so I think it's very important for our next governor to understand this issue, not just on the policy level, to be able to empathize about it too. That will make you a better policymaker and a better leader. And so to me, the Medicaid expansion program is a no-brainer.
Is there anything we can do as a state to help lower the healthcare costs for small businesses? And that's what you're seeing now, is that many people are posting that their insurance is going to cost them, $2,000 and $3,000 and $4,000 a month for family plans.
I do. I think when you're running for governor, there are some elements where you are at the mercy a little bit of what Washington does. Right now, Lord knows in January of 2019 exactly what medical cards I will have in my hand in January of 19. There's tremendous uncertainty. They've tried to pass some bills. In fact, the tax reform plan that they're debating right now, they've just in the last 24 hours included the provision to eliminate the individual mandate.
I was going to mention that earlier, and that's what, they're calling that a tax, and people are going to they're counting that almost like a tax reduction because you wouldn't have to purchase insurance. And for some people, they may look at it that way, but then it would end up possibly in the situation your family ended up in.
Absolutely, which takes us in the opposite direction. Remember, one of my mission, I want this to be the best state in America to start and grow a business. That's part of it. We need the free flow of capital and talent. We need people to feel free to do that uniquely American thing, that incredibly important thing to the economy, which is to leave your existing business and to go and start a business, because we know that's how the economy grows. And the #1 reason people do not leave an employer to start a business is because of the way we do healthcare in this country. We have an employer-based system whose genesis is World War II, when all the boys were off to war, and FDR put a wage freeze on because of the inflationary pressure, and the employer said, listen, I can't give you more wage, but I can give you health insurance. I can give you lots of it. And why not? Life expectancy is 66, and nobody changes jobs, and healthcare is cheap. Here we are 75 years later, and none of these three things are remotely true. And it has become a tremendous impediment to entrepreneurship, which leads to growth in the economy and job creation. So I'm running for governor. I'm not running for federal office. And so I don't have unilateral say, who does really, on this issue. I believe we need to move to a system that detethers insurance from your employer, which impedes entrepreneurship, and attach it to the individual. It's universal health care. There are many ways you can get to that destination, and I'm a pragmatist about the way to get there. But because of my family's personal experience, because of 20-plus years of seeing the impediments to entrepreneurship, I am very passionate about the end. The means I'm willing to discuss with anybody. And so that's where I want to end up. To the extent that we can collaborate with our neighbors to the south, to the west, and east, to collaborate. Nevada has talked about a Medicaid for All program that's a public option element. That has gotten bipartisan support. That's something I would definitely look at if Washington puts us in a position where we need to get creative because they've cut the Medicaid expansion program. We have to be ready for a number of circumstances, But my ultimate goal, and it will lower costs because of scale that we lack right now. And I do think one last element I want to mention that a lot of my Democratic friends don't tend to highlight is there's tremendous innovation going on to give the medical consumer options to be able to shop in much more realistic ways. The intersection of price and quality is called value. We do that with many other products and services in our economy. But for non-emergency situations in healthcare, there are tremendous products, some of them New Hampshire-based technology products, that can allow people to more easily take routine medical choices they have to make and to identify that intersection of price and quality in a way that can incentivize them and the provider to deliver quality at a better price and help hold down some of the inflationary pressures in healthcare. So I believe it is not inconsistent to at the same time say that we need to move to a universal healthcare system while also embracing the power of the free market to give people that increased consumer choice along the way. And so to me, those two elements would give us an optimal healthcare system, and that's where I want to end up.
Right. I can't ignore our Representative David Lyle, who is his show, so don't want to ignore David's question. So he has, what is your thoughts on the voucher bill?
Yes. So for folks at home that maybe haven't heard a lot about this, SB Senate Bill 193. It is a bill, proponents, and I'm an opponent, proponents, mainly conservatives, say that it will take most of the state dollars that go per child for education aid, and would allow a family whose kid leaves your local public school system to take it with them to pay for a private school or a parochial school. I think it's an awful idea. I've said it publicly, and I will bang the drum on this. It narrowly passed the House committee that is studying this 10-9. Yep. And then the full House will, early in 2018, have an opportunity to work with it. It's a lousy idea, and here's why. As it is, the state of New Hampshire provides a relatively small portion of the cost of educating your children at your local public school. No state relies more on local property tax to pay for education than the state of New Hampshire. So the last problem we have is the state providing too much help for your local property tax relief. This bill will siphon off some of those public dollars and take one of our big challenges as a state, which is the lack of scale that we have as it is, and make it worse. We've lost 25% of our school-age population in New Hampshire in the last 15 years. No state in America has seen a greater drop in its high school population in the last decade than New Hampshire. Just came out. At the same time that all that has happened, a collapse in our student population, we have seen a 10% increase in the number of SAUs, school administrative units. And what does all this mean to the guy on the street? It means we have very high administrative costs per pupil, and it means more and more of your local property tax is leaving the classroom, not because of waste, fraud, and abuse, but because we're spreading more dollars over more buildings. This bill makes it worse. And it means your administrative costs will go up per pupil. It means starting teacher pay will go down, not up. It means your local property taxes will go up. These are all running completely counter to data and demography in our state. It is exactly the wrong set of moves you would do if you were trying to deliver the best educational outcomes in your community at a price that you can afford. So I want to lower your property taxes and increase the quality of your public schools. And SB 193 is the opposite of what you would do to achieve those goals.
The House or the state had just a lot of communities are voting on the Keno bill in Nashua. It passed by 1,000 votes. I think it was, roughly 6,000 to 5,000 for us to hold Keno. Nashua was currently funding full-day kindergarten for our students here in the city. What is your thoughts on Keno and some communities? I know Rochester's having a recount. I think Portsmouth didn't even put it on the ballot.
We didn't even put it on the ballot.
I'm not sure where the funding's now going to come from to support what they're trying to do.
Well, I believe, first of all, I am not a fan of expanded gaming or gambling in any form. I think it runs counter to that long-term mission of making this the best state in America to start and raise a family and to start and grow a business. It is a field, all forms of gambling, in my opinion, are, in the big picture, a declining industry for all kinds of reasons. And it also means that we avoid, as Chris Sununu and the legislature did, it avoids the honest conversation. If you believe that full-day kindergarten for all students in New Hampshire is a top priority, as Chris Sununu said, and in a $6 billion a year operating budget, you can't find the $15 to $20 million a year of extra money. $6 billion in order to pay for what you said was your biggest priority, then you're not too good at this job. And to me, competence is really important. And so we need vision, and we need a little bit of courage. And so, for example, to me, it's a top priority. In fact, we're one of 6 states in America that do not provide public funding for pre-K. And the next closest state on the map to New Hampshire is South Dakota. There is no state east of South Dakota that does not provide some form of public funding of pre-K, except for New Hampshire. So we're arguing about K. We're behind on the pre-K. And it doesn't fund kindergarten in those communities. Take it from this ex-mayor who's audited cities off and on for 20 years around the country. If your community did not feel it had the resources before this law got passed to provide full-day kindergarten in your community, I can assure you that you do not have the level of confidence yet either to provide it, because communities are not going to have their kindergarten funding impacted by whether or not they pass the Keno. It was not tethered to your community's decision. And so what's going to happen is a small number of cities and towns in New Hampshire will end up subsidizing most communities that will end up not passing it. I understand why the current mayor and board of aldermen in a given city passed it, because they're in a position where they're looking to be part of the additional revenue. But the real challenge began with Governor Sununu and legislators who put the state and our communities in a position where they could not find the $20 million in a $6 billion budget, despite saying it was their number one priority. You got to step up, and if it's, a proposal without funding, in my business, we call that an idea.
Right.
So full-day kindergarten is an idea Chris Sununu had, but he was unwilling to lead to fund it. And that's the kind of leadership we need in 2019.
And it left many people, many of the state representatives, in a tough situation, because they
Very
totally favored to support full-day kindergarten, but they didn't. They almost had to look the other way as they pulled the yes button or pushed the yes button on it.
And so I don't, even though I disagree strongly with the way it went down for the reasons I've just described, I do not hold it against my Democratic friends in particular, many of whom don't support Keno. I know, I've talked to many of them. They personally oppose Keno. They also agree they would have been willing to find additional revenue in other places if that's what it took. Their values are consistent with my values. And so I don't hold them in any negative feelings because of it. They were put in an impossible situation. Governor Sununu and Republican leaders knew it, and they put them in that situation. And they politicized an issue that really has tremendous bipartisan support and should have been easily passed in an intellectually and budgetarily honest way.
So I want to switch gears a little bit about talking about commuter rail. That's something that's been talked about in New Hampshire for, as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
And I remember the train station in Nashua many, many years ago. And now Nashua has a potential plan that's being put forward about bringing rail up to the train station. We have a park and ride on Crown Street here in Nashua. I don't know if you had a chance to go over, but the park and ride actually is up and running and open, and that's where the proposed train station will go. So your thoughts on rail? People are on all sides of it. Obviously, many people. I was at a meeting one time with Sean Jasper, who no longer will be the speaker, but
Right.
he said point blank, he said, it'll never pass in New Hampshire as long as I'm around. And so, anyways, that being said, thoughts on rail and even the Nashua plan, if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, so first with the Nashua plan, I think any community, and I give Mayor Donchis and the Board of Aldermen a lot of credit, they, in lieu of the state being highly engaged in helping address this, they have been very scrappy and entrepreneurial in their own right to find ways to get the ball rolling using the private sector and a local private partner, public-private relationship. So tremendous kudos for that effort. In the long run, though, when we talk about attracting more talent into New Hampshire, I alluded to this at the outset of the program, I acknowledge, I favor rail, and I acknowledge that in the initial years of it, you may have people moving to New Hampshire, or that already live here, that will use it to go inside the 128 belt to work and then come home. And that will have a more direct benefit to the greater Boston economy in the near term. I get that. But I believe this. A lot of politicians focus on how do we keep our young people that live here after high school. That's important. But there's a certain percentage. They're going to leave even if you gave them free college and a car and a whatever. They want to go to a different place for a while. I'm more concerned with increasing the number of young people and their families that live in New Hampshire. We're shrinking. And so even if I keep an increasing percentage of young people in the state, it is a shrinking denominator in effect. And so I am fighting a losing war, even if I feel like I'm winning a battle once in a while. So I joke with people, and the rail is a part of this. The most beautiful, I'm a born and bred New Hampshireite. The most beautiful sight in New Hampshire is not Mount Washington, and it's not Lake Winnipesaukee, and it's not the ocean. It's a U-Haul driving north. That is very exciting to me. And so if it means that in the near term, a young family picks southern New Hampshire, uses the rail to go work in Massachusetts, and that access to it was part of their decision-making process to coming to New Hampshire to start a family, to start their life together. Rock on. I'm all good with that. What I believe and know is that many of those families, after they're here for 3-5 years, they eventually want to work their entire life once their kids enter the school system. Their entire life, as much as they can, is encapsulated within their community. And that's wonderful. And it means that they start a business, maybe at home, maybe they work for a business closer to home. This is what I need. I need the talent to come into the state, and if I can get them in New Hampshire, I have tremendous confidence that I can keep them in New Hampshire, including for their professional life, even if it takes a few years after. So I think it would be tremendous in that regard. It clearly will be very beneficial to the economy here in Nashua, and then I believe up to Manchester, where we would need to extend it. I also think it'll be great for the airport in Manchester. We have been losing gates. We've been losing action to TF Green Airport in Providence. That's our competitor for the intermediate-sized airport that's close to Logan. We used to be winning that war, and now we're losing it, including gates from Southwest Airline and JetBlue, for example. It has diminished the value of Manchester Airport by several $100 million over the last 10 to 15 years. And that's arguably our biggest infrastructure asset, single asset, in the state. So when I talk to experts on this, getting rail that can connect people from around the 128 belt that want to avoid Logan, now they're going south to Providence, we need them to regain them, to come back to Manchester. And if we do that, we will add hundreds of millions of dollars of value to this invaluable piece of infrastructure we already have. So it's good on both levels.
Yeah, I think you're spot on that. We had spoken earlier off camera, and we were talking about my family and about how I had stayed in New Hampshire, and my brother and sister, and we bought homes here, but our children, my daughter lives in Minnesota, my niece, one of my sister's daughter lives in Columbus, Ohio, and my brother's daughter lives right outside of Philadelphia. And I said that so many times to people, how we don't necessarily need our children to all stay here, because people are going to grow, and with the education that they receive, all went through public schools here in New Hampshire and other universities, but they grow. But certainly we want to attract the younger people to come to Nashua or come to the state of New Hampshire and stay here.
And that goes back to when we talk about some of the local elected officials that won the at-large seats last week. Young, happen to be Democrats, sharp, professional people. Usually, if you want to get quality people in public life, it will be the result of an integration into the community that often, but not always, includes kids entering the school system, going from a renter to a homeowner, starting a local business, or working for a business in the community. Getting involved with your Chamber of Commerce, working with the local United Way. There's scores of ways to do that integration. But we know that once a young person and his or her family, we can get them 3-4 different ways integrated into the community, we probably have them for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, you're building social capital. And when that happens, that's one of the key ingredients to legitimate entrepreneurship and economic growth. So do I think that the commuter rail is the panacea? No. Do I think it's an important element of public investment that will breed private investment? Absolutely.
Can we switch gears a little bit and talk about energy costs in New Hampshire? Not only for the private citizens, residents who are trying to pay their energy costs, but certainly business. You keep hearing of like so many people in the business and saying that the energy costs in New Hampshire are so much higher than other states. We have Northern Pass, we have renewable energy. Thoughts on that area?
This is one place where it highlights the difference in the way that Governor Sununu and I see the world and how we attack problems. Chris and I both agree that your electricity bill is among the highest in the country, and that's true for residential and commercial, and that it's a problem. He looks at it as a supply problem, and I look at it as a supply and demand problem. And so for Chris, he says, give me Northern Pass, which I've opposed for 7 years now, since day one of the project. It's bad for the environment. It will hurt property values in the communities where it goes through. And I'll tell you what, in terms of ratepayers, I would be much more excited about Northern Pass if I was running for governor of Connecticut than governor of New Hampshire, because it'll lower the electric bill for the residents of Connecticut more than it ever will for New Hampshire. It is the equivalent of a electricity superhighway with no exit ramps until it leaves New Hampshire. So it's a poor move, and it will block where I think the future of electricity and energy really is. Similarly, I feel that way about the NED natural gas pipeline that's been proposed, or similar projects from the West. These build a bridge, bridge technologies you hear about. Here's the problem. We've crossed the bridge. You wouldn't build a bridge you've already crossed. And both Northern Pass and NED are examples of the bridge of the past. To me, reducing demand through technology, like they have in parts of the world, Europe, western part of the US, upgrade the electric grid. That is by far the #1 infrastructure investment we can make that can lower your electric bill 15 to 20% when fully implemented. And we can do it in a way that will increase the desirability of wind and solar, local, small to mid-size. It will diversify our energy sources, which is great for preventing cost shocks. As it is, the majority of our electricity in the region comes from natural gas, because it's close now with some of the fracking and all, and it's cheap compared to some others. The problem with that is it's already 50% of our mix. And if we do what Chris and others want to do, it'll be 75% of our mix soon. Now that natural gas is getting exported to other parts of the world, it is becoming a much more volatile price, in terms of price, source of energy. And if we have 3/4 of our electricity coming from an increasingly volatile source of it, natural gas, we put our residential and commercial ratepayers in peril's way. And I think that the answer is in an upgraded electric grid that'll lower the amount you use by taking care of peak demand. It'll make solar and wind without public subsidy much more doable in this economy. It'll be local. It's pro-entrepreneur. It's great for the environment. And perhaps most importantly for our viewers, it'll lower your electric bill 15 to 20% when implemented. So to me, that's the future. Chris sees Northern Pass and NED as the future. Could not disagree more.
One of the other things that's keeping some of the younger people possibly from staying into the state is the cost of housing here in New Hampshire. I was being a realtor at our meeting on Tuesday. They talked about the housing cost. Now, being a real estate agent, and for folks who have equity in their home, it's nice to see home prices appreciate. A lot of times we're working with the seniors who are downsizing. You own their home for 30 years, and you go in and you say, yes, your home in Nashua is $300,000. However, the average price of a single-family home in New Hampshire is $265,000, and the single price of a single-family home in Nashua is $300,000. Coupled with that, a two-bedroom apartment in Nashua or in Hillsborough County, a two-bedroom apartment is about $1,250, and in Rockingham County, it's over $1,300. And then certainly the costs are a little lower in some of the other counties, but their wages are lower, so it's probably proportionally the same.
Yes.
What can we do, if anything, to and one of the things that's preventing some of the millennials from purchasing home is obviously the education debt they have, but that's probably another subject. But what can we do to possibly have more affordable workforce housing for young professionals and people?
It's interesting.
Not only young professionals, but even, people just trying to pay.
People
trying to pay their rent.
Trying to pay their rent. and having aspiration of maybe being able to have an asset. The challenge is, in part, that the cost of single-family housing is going up faster than most people's ability to pay for that housing. So if you're not already in the market in large parts of New Hampshire of home ownership, it is getting harder every year to do it, not easier. And I hear Portsmouth may be the most acute example of any city in New Hampshire. We're nearing $400,000 as the median price for a single-family home, and we're only 15 square miles, so we have limited ways to deal with it. I got asked at a meet and greet last month, what is the number one thing you learned as a mayor that helps you as a governor? And the last ex-mayor we had as a governor was Nashua's own Hugh Gregg. It's been a while. It's been a long time. 50s. And you can tell, because if you had been a mayor, you would know, because you're on the receiving end of so much state policy, what works and doesn't work, and I think you'd make different decisions in some cases. So, in terms of real estate, the answer I said is the power of your land use boards. If there's one thing I didn't fully appreciate till I was in local elected office, the mayor has some power. But you know who really has it? It's the head of your zoning board of adjustment, your planning board, your historic district, if you have one in your community. That's the power. Density. Height. Carrots and sticks in the zoning codes that incentivize developers. You can't mandate some of this stuff, but there are incentives that work that can say, look, as a community, we want more diversity of housing stock. We want folks to be able to begin with a small apartment, move to a larger apartment, move to different forms so that they can stay in the community as their housing needs expand, and then often later in life, contract back again. So when I was mayor, we would sit down with a lot of developers. And I said to them, look, we were dealing, this is back in '06. I had control over our public buildings in trying to make them more environmentally and energy friendly. But 90% of the energy consumed in Portsmouth was not from public buildings, they're from private buildings in terms of building consumption. Yeah. And I said, what would help? What are the carrots? And it turned out the number one carrot, after listening to experts, was floor area ratio. We're getting into Nerdville here, but it's important that your governor understands Nerdville a little bit. And floor area ratio basically says, in the same building, you can get an extra floor, typically, and that means it's a more valuable property, even with the same height, depth, and width. If you did certain things to make them LEED certified or preserving public space, you can do the same thought process as it relates to increasing building stock, diversity of building stock, housing stock, and affordability of it. I am not somebody that's going to say that the public sector is going to be in the home ownership business. That's not the New Hampshire way. We don't have the money for it. I don't think that's the most efficient way to help. But I do think local governments, and I will use the bully pulpit powerfully on this, need to think of zoning and land use as this critically important tool that, if done right, can really rethink the way and reprioritize increasing our housing stock and the affordability of that stock. Because right now we got supply and demand problems, and they're not matching demographic changes. And until we use land use and zoning codes in a way that is progressive, and I don't even mean in the political, liberal, conservative way, but progressive in terms of new urbanism and being futuristic about it. We have best practices around the country that are succeeding in this. There's no reason New Hampshire can't either. So I am very excited, and I love that type of work and would like to push that as governor to help collaborate with local communities to use their building codes that way.
When I told my wife, Lisa, who you've met, I said, I'm doing the show today for Dave Lyle, and I said, she says, how long is the show? And I said, it's an hour. And she said, what are you going to talk about with Steve Marchand for an hour? I go, you've met Steve and you know me. I said, so we've got about 3 minutes left. I said, we're going to easily fill an hour. I think you and I could go 3 hours.
It's easy.
So is there anything that we didn't talk about that you might want to talk and let the viewers know, and how people can get a hold of you, how people can reach you, and a little bit about your campaign as well?
Sure, and of course, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Love spending time with you, and I appreciate Dave putting this together. You're right. We could do this all night. And if they don't cut us off, we will. We'll just keep going.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I'm glad to come back anytime. We've done over 130 meet and greet style events, and that provides us the opportunity to really engage with people on a whole range of topics beyond what we've done today. And I hope that when people see me engage this way, they see the seriousness of purpose, the mission, the experience, the commitment I have to being the best state in America to start and raise a family, to start and grow a business that'll help all people. So then go on my website, stevemarchand.com. You can get in the weeds on these and other policies. That's also where you can find where we're going to be doing different kinds of events, typically open to the public. We want people to come in, not just Democrats. I want Republicans. I want undeclareds, fiscal conservative. I don't care. Come on down. And I think that they'll find it to be a highly engaging process. And we get people, when they leave, they're leaving with signs and bumper stickers because they see the commitment that we're making. And obviously, folks can check that out there. They can sign up as a volunteer. They can even give online if they're so smitten with the cause. And know that over the next 51 weeks, we'll continue with the same drive and passion and laser focus. And what I believe will ultimately be a successful effort that's going to put us in a great position in 2019 and beyond.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming in. You have some great ideas and some great energy, and certainly have a love for the state of New Hampshire, so I appreciate that. I do extend an invitation to you that I do have a radio show on WSMN 1590 AM. We also stream it at WSMN1590.com. I'll be doing other shows hopefully here in the future as well, so I extend that invitation to you as well to come forward and be on that show. Dave will be back next month on this program. I want to thank Rebecca for doing the board and all the folks here at Access Nashua TV, Channel 96, and best of luck in your campaign, and thanks so much again for coming in.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
I'm Paul Bergeron. This show is Community Roundtable, and our host, Dave Lyle, will be back next week. My guest was Steve Marchand. You can go to his Facebook page, or you can go to his website for more information. Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to register to vote. Thank you, and have a great day.